You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
Thank you so much for all of the positive feedback that we have gotten so far on the Lovers Lane murders. And we would love to encourage you to watch the show if you have not done so already.
What are the options to watch the show, Kristin?
Well, you have a multitude of options, especially because we know that not everyone has cable. You can watch on your cable channel if you have it. That is Oxygen. You can also watch on the Oxygen website or the Oxygen app. You can also watch on, let's see if I've got the whole list here, Hulu, YouTube TV, Roku, Sling TV, and probably there are several other options that we have not yet heard about. So if you find an option to watch our series, please let us know so that we can add it to our list.
If you're searching, look for the Lovers Lane Murders. The show's out there, and you can definitely find it. You might have to spend a minute or two looking for it if you don't have Oxygen on your cable or satellite.
And this is not just a one-time event. It is already being rerun on the Oxygen channel. So all you need to do is take a look through your listings, and you will be able to find it. So if you missed it the first time around, never fear, you can catch it again.
The show is repeating, and keep in mind there are 4 episodes, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they're not necessarily now running them as 2-hour specials. So
right.
You might be able to find 1, 2, 3, or 4. Look for them on your favorite outlet.
And we do appreciate all of those excellent comments, the likes, all of the questions that we have received about various aspects of the case, some of which we will be addressing in future episodes. So thank you so much for your enthusiasm as we have gotten the show to air and as we continue to respond to all of your excellent questions on social media.
And the tips are coming in.
Oh, yes, the tips are coming in.
We'll be turning those over to the FBI and the Virginia State Police as we can, because ultimately the investigators need to follow up on the tips. This isn't something that Kristin or Bill or other family members can follow up on. Interesting observation, I think, is that every time there's a major bit of media coverage on the Colonial Parkway murders, people come out of the woodwork with what to us is new information. So we dutifully pass it on to the FBI and the Virginia State Police for their follow-up.
And if you do have a tip and would like to get hold of us, remember that you can reach us on our Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page, our Mind Over Murder Facebook page, and there is the option to private message if you don't want to put your comment out there for the world to see. We also have a Mind Over Murder website,
mindovermurderpodcast.com. And then we've just added a new colonialparkwaymurders.com website as well. And we're adding photos and new information. So those are growing and changing as we speak, but both of those websites are now up. I think colonialparkwaymurders.com has one of the most complete media listings I've seen anywhere. We keep collecting articles and adding them to the list. It's not definitive because there have been thousands of articles written about the Colonial Parkway murders over the years, but we are trying to make sure that we highlight the major articles that have been pivotal to moving the case forward.
So if you are interested in the case and you just can't get enough of it, do check out colonialparkwaymurders.com. And you can also check out our site for Mind Over Murder at mindovermurderpodcast.com.
In other true crime news, we had a very important development in the Alexis Murphy case. You may recall Alexis is the 17-year-old girl who disappeared in Lovingston, Virginia. The Nelson County Sheriff's Department announced on the 17th, this past Wednesday, that Alexis Murphy's body had been found about 1.5 miles from where Randy Taylor, her convicted murderer, lived, in his trailer. The dates are as follows. Alexis Murphy's body was found on December 5th, 2020, and then it was identified by the Commonwealth of Virginia Medical Examiner's Office on February 5th. And then they held the news, which we completely understand. They wanted to give Alexis Murphy's family time to adjust to this news, which was not unexpected. I mean, they knew that she was gone. They also wanted to give them time to arrange for funeral, private services, that sort of thing. Beyond what Alexis' family had to say in the press release, they have not said anything further publicly. At this point, Kristin and I are left with a number of questions, and other people as well. Randy Taylor was convicted of Alexis Murphy's murder in a no-body homicide prosecution. Many of us feel that he's also involved in the 2010 disappearance of Samantha Clark. Many of us suspected that wherever Alexis Murphy's remains were found, Samantha Clark and perhaps other victims of Randy Taylor might be found. We don't know that that's the case, and one thing that's striking at this moment is that Alexis Murphy's body was found on December 5th. If this is in an agricultural field or something like that, I don't live in Virginia, Kristin, but I don't think they would be working a field that late in the year, December 5th. Do you?
Not that I'm aware of, but keep in mind, I am a city girl. Well, Williamsburg's not exactly a city, but it's not exactly rural either. So I can't speak to that definitively, but now it does seem a little odd to me that someone would be out in the field. So I know that you and I both think that someone tipped them off. And my biggest question, in fact, my first question was, did Randy Taylor finally give up her location?
We hope that in future reporting, there will be some indication how this particular location off Route 29 was identified as a place where a search needed to be conducted, or did someone stumble upon her remains, or what have you. Hopefully that'll come out. Certainly we know Trina Murphy, Alexis' aunt. This isn't something we're going to go to her right now and ask. Maybe at a more appropriate time, we might bring it up. I know I sent her a note to tell her how sorry we were about the news, and she responded. I wasn't going to pounce on her and ask her, oh, by the way, how did this all come about? I think perhaps down the road, she may talk to us or other outlets and let us know a little bit more about how that came to pass. I'm hopeful that this might also lead to the discovery of Samantha Clark.
But we do want to extend our heartfelt sympathies and caring and love to the Murphy family. We are thinking about the Murphy family, and we are so glad that you do have the answers finally that you need. I can't imagine how rough that must have been not knowing where she was. So even though this is sad, it's also, I'm sure, maybe a bit of a relief. Coming up next, we have an interview with Dr. Laura Pettler, who appeared on the Lovers Lane murders, a forensic criminologist and a licensed private investigator. We're looking forward to an excellent conversation with her. And we are thrilled to be joined today by Dr. Laura Pettler, a forensic criminologist and licensed private investigator. Dr. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kristin. Thank you, Bill. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, we're just excited that you let us hang out with you. That's all.
You're very kind. I'm excited to hang out with the two of you. It's been quite a while.
Can you go ahead and start for our listeners by telling us about your background and how you got involved in criminology, law enforcement, that sort of thing?
Sure. I'll keep it brief. I have been in homicide 20 years, and my entire career, including the years prior, I was in psychology. So my career spans about 25 years at this point. I originally thought that I wanted to work in the prison system, rehabilitating homicide offenders, and quickly realized that was not a very smart idea. I quickly changed my idea and went into just trying to understand how a criminal comes to be. Sorry, there's alarms all over the farm, so I know where people are. So,
oh, okay.
Yeah, there's alarms and cameras and everything all over the place. So
no one is going to sneak up on you.
No, I mean, my house, there's guns everywhere and bows and arrows and Dobermans. It wouldn't be a good idea.
I picture you coming to the door with a crossbow or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no question that's a surefire. You're not going to miss. It's a good idea. It's a really good idea.
It's quite an image.
I hadn't considered that as a choice of weapon, but I like it. That's a great idea.
It's a big dart. Have you ever seen them? They're like these. Yeah, they're big, thick, surefire murder weapon.
Nice.
It's reliable. It's reliable. I mean, sometimes bullets aren't reliable. A dart is definitely reliable.
Good to,
so I like
good to know. So come to the door with your crossbow and say hello and be friendly until there's time not to be friendly, I guess.
Yeah, I'm like the weirdest person and everything's like medieval to me. So, I was just born in the wrong period of time. So back to how I got into doing this. I really wanted to use my life to make a difference. I wanted to leave the world better than I found it. And I wasn't really sure how to do it when I was so young. But I created like this master plan and was just like, well, let me start out in psychology. Then let me go out and work in the world a little bit, which I did. And I had this horse farm here and I taught riding lessons and trained horses for a living. I worked at mental health at the same time. So I was like studying kids because I worked on the adolescent inpatient unit and then took that into my master's degree and focused half of my master's on forensic psychology and the other half on forensic science. And that is where I fell in love with bloodstains. So here I am out in the yard at my dad's house where I was staying when I was doing my master's degree. And I'm like flinging beet juice all over the place, like attached to weapons like sticks and clubs and knives and stuff. And I am quite sure the neighbors were like, what is that crazy girl over there doing? Because I was kind of known to be like not off like crazy, but because I had my daughter when I was 16, I've always been looked at like people just up there always watched me to screw up. They waited for me to make a mistake. They were counting on the fact that I would be a statistic. And of course, I agreed that I was going to be a statistic, just not the statistic they thought that I was going to be. Mm-hmm. So I finished my master's degree and continued into bloodstains. I studied with Herbert MacDonald. He's one of the fathers of bloodstain pattern analysis for the Western Hemisphere, at least. And I got trained in shooting reconstruction and crime scene reconstruction in blood more than just the 40-hour class that I took from him. He gave me a job. So then I started working cases for him in the private sector. I did that for a couple years and then opened Carolina Forensics. And Carolina Forensics is now Laura Pettler and Associates, but it started out as Carolina and Forensics. And so the whole point was to like work cases maybe that no one else wanted to work and things like that. And so then I met the DA when I was singing one night. I was a professional singer for many years. I was at a gig performing and I met the DA at this gig. He was there and we got to talking and he was really funny because he was really offstandish and he just wasn't friendly. And I'm like really smiley. And so I was just like, he doesn't like me at all. And then I had to go back on stage. The break was over. So then I went back up and I started singing again. And then I came back down and I went back stage again. And here he was back there. And there were no more waters in this cooler. And he had one and he drank out of it, but he had one. He said, here, you can have mine. That was fine. It didn't matter to me. I just needed water. So we got to talking and he said, maybe you can work a case for me. I've got a cold case of a 6-year-old child and we can't figure out what the murder weapon is. So I got to work on that case with him and figured out the murder weapon, demonstrated it, and actually recreated the wound pattern in the victim's head on some foam in front of the police department, the DA's office, the State Bureau of Investigation, and everyone else that happened to be at that presentation back then.
Wow.
And that's when they decided, you know what? She is very strange, very weird. strangest person we've ever met. However, Michael Parker saw an opportunity to change North Carolina, change the way that prosecutorial offices worked. And he created the very first idea for building a crime scene reconstruction and behavioral analysis program. So he hired me to run that. And I started as a DA's investigator with the state of North Carolina and ran the very first and its only crime scene reconstruction and behavioral analysis program. With that came my appointment as the director of the cold case task force, a member of the Richmond County Gang Task Force, and running a school called the Richmond Community College International Forensics Institute. So we had so much programming. So then we left the DA's office, and after that, I became an appointed deputy coroner in South Carolina. I worked suicides and any odd type of death scenes that the coroner thought could use some type of a specialist to look at them. And so then after that, I ended up in the private sector. So we left the DA's office. And so that was it. That's how I got in and out. And, I've always specialized in kind of strange things, so then I invented the kaleidoscope system, and I've been inventing methodologies for law enforcement to solve murders. And our murder room, which is the method that we use here at LPA, has a 98% solve rate.
Wow.
So that's what we do now. And so I work cases and both for the government and in the private sector. And it just all kind of spun into that. So like my 25-year master plan, it worked. It's not always ended up to be what I thought it would be. I never imagined coming out of music and retiring from professional music and doing all of this on stage. And then a couple years later, in 2012, I went into true crime television. I never thought that far ahead. I never realized true crime television was going to be a thing. Mm-hmm. When I retired from professional music, I was like, I'm done. I'm off stage. There's no more. I was happy. I was content, but then I got into true crime TV, and I really love it because it kind of takes that show business side of me that I really, truly enjoy. And then it also combines that with, with my profession as a forensic criminologist. So, I've really got the best of both worlds at this point in my career. I'm very happy.
Before we move into true crime TV and other things, explain a little bit more about the murder room. You and I have talked about this off mic before. Sure. Explain how it works and your roundtable of experts and so on.
So LPA is structured as a roundtable. That's our organizational structure, as opposed to like people who have like a vertical association or structure like a police department, very paramilitary. Where you have a chief at the top and then you have like all of the different ranks. We don't have that at LPA. Our culture is actually the polar opposite of paramilitary. The roundtable of experts includes myself and 16 other experts from crime scene to courtroom. And the roundtable doesn't have a head of the table because it's round. So everyone is equal, and we all serve as spokes on the wheel of solvability and clearance. And so there's a big lazy Susan in the middle of the table. It's about 3 feet wide. It's huge. So as each group goes, so as crime scene goes, they put their evidence on the lazy Susan that proves the case or whatever it is. When autopsy and forensic path go, then they add what they have to contribute to the case onto the lazy Susan. Lazy Susan moves so that everybody else in the group can shift it around and look at the pieces of evidence that the other teams are bringing to the table. So then when forensic criminology goes, of course, I do the same thing. Of course, my main contributing piece was always the victimology. And then when reconstruction goes, they do the same thing. Sometimes what they do won't fit on the lazy Susan. We physically have to demo it. So there's a lot of reenactment that goes on around the round table, such as empty firearms and demo firearms being put to people's heads and different body parts, and people being put in different positions so that we can figure this out. It takes everybody's brains to do that. So then by the time we get through all the experts, DNA or anthropology or any of the other experts that we have to bring in, because each case is so different and, it requires a different type of expert, the prosecutorial piece at the end, they always kind of go last. And so then that's the way that the actual table works and the experts around the table. And then the consulting experts that are kind of in the background of around the table that chime in. On the walls themselves, there's an entire system of moving parts that start with a map of the crime scene and other important locations, all marked on a map that goes up on the wall first. And then the victimology goes second. And the way that we organize each piece is really interesting. And I really wish that more agencies would adopt this method because it makes it a lot easier to work with DA's offices. If you can prove it about the victim, it goes in the green column and it's put on green paper. If you can sort of prove it, you put it on yellow paper. And if you can't prove it, you put it on red. And then it gets put on the wall. So you end up with like 3 columns of stuff that you can prove in green, stuff you can't prove, or you can sort of prove in yellow, and stuff you can't prove in red. But in cold case investigation, what's most critical to remember is that each column is equal in value. Just because you can't prove red and you can prove green does not mean that green is more valuable than red. Because when it comes to cold cases, the reason you can't prove the red is because you don't have all the information yet. So in my experience as a cold case person, and I've worked lots and lots and lots of them, I don't even know how many. Sometimes people just all of a sudden, someone will get arrested and they're in the interview and they say, well, you know what? I want to tell you about that 1980 murder of so-and-so. I know you guys thought it was a suicide, but it's not.
Right.
It's another manner of death. And then all of a sudden, all of those red pieces that you've had on the walls for years, they turn green.
Shades of Samuel Little with the Texas Ranger coming in and talking to him, and all of a sudden he starts spilling about cases across the country.
That's correct. And so your red column is as equally as important as your green column in the murder room. For each piece, so for victimology, it's got 3 columns. For the crime scene characteristics, 3 columns. Autopsy, 3 columns. Witnesses, they get sequestered. If they are not important witnesses that are going to prove the case, they get put into what we call white noise. So all the crap that you have in murder cases, and believe me, there's a lot, all of that stuff that doesn't make a hill of beans and is just like muddying the water and confusing people, all of that gets sequestered into white noise under the term white noise. And it's this whole wall. It's an entire wall dedicated all the stuff that we have to take out and put somewhere else. So it's both a quantitative and qualitative, empirical, multidisciplinary system with a bunch of fail-safes built into it. So if you try to jump a level, it has 6 levels. It's kind of like, well, Kristin, you're a school teacher. This will be right up your professional alley. Okay. So like you can't take a first grader and put them in 6th grade. Right. Because they don't have everything from 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade in order to perform in 6th grade. The murder room operates the same way. So when you are in level 1, it is impossible to jump levels because the stuff that you need to work in level 4 or 5 comes from the underpinning of the other levels. It's a taxonomy. It's a hierarchy. And so you cannot go to the next level until you've completed the level before it. And so it keeps investigators where they need to be in the investigatory process that's victim-centered and scientific and all of these things, because the problem with most every single case we've ever had come to LPA, 2 problems. Number 1, it's suspect-centered. That's the very first problem. If they come in suspect-centered. And the second one, they have no operating system. So it would be like having your cell phone without an operating system and trying to put apps on it. You can't put apps on the phone if you don't have an operating system. You can't investigate a homicide without a system. Our system determines our outcome. If we take a hammer and try to change a tire, we're most likely going to fail. In order to properly investigate homicide, you have to select the right methodology to do it. But 9 times out of 10, 99% out of 100, investigators don't have a method. They don't have a system. It doesn't have checks and balances. It's not quantitative and qualitative. They're missing all of the key ingredients for success in homicide or death investigation. That is why the murder room has a 98% solve rate, because it takes all of those things that law enforcement notoriously is absent from their investigations. And that's even saying if they've done a great investigation at their level of what they know to do. When they come to us, number one, they're not victim-centered. They're suspect-centered. So they automatically stall. They will automatically stall if they're suspect-centered. Number two, our system determines our outcome, and they don't have one. They have no system. It's not interrelated. It's not interconnected. It's not mappable, trackable, and measurable. It is not structurally sound. The murder room is structurally sound. Anybody can use the murder room. Anybody. If you learn the method, you can learn it. You can do it. Any agency, any detective. It's just something that obviously we promote because of its success rate.
That is fascinating.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. So ultimately, how did you end up becoming involved in Lover's Lane murders? Because obviously this is a case that Bill and I have a huge amount of interest in seeing moved forward after 34 years.
Right.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after these messages.
Do you like our show, Mind Over Murder, and want to create your own podcast?
Well then, let us tell you about Anchor.
First of all, it's free. And who doesn't love free, right?
I like free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer.
You can even add any song from Spotify directly to your episodes. The possibilities are endless for what you can create, whether it's music analysis, your own radio show, or something the world's never heard before.
Anchor will then distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more platforms.
And you can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership.
I like the sound of that. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Right here, Anchor.
Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started on your own podcast.
You can tell them Kristin and Bill from Mind Over Murder sent you. One of the most frequent questions we're asked here at Mind Over Murder is, how can I help?
Thanks to Othram, a leading forensic DNA testing lab for law enforcement, you can get involved and help solve real cases.
If you have tested at a consumer genetics company, you can contribute your data to DNAsolves.com. The process is easy and confidential. Just 2 simple steps. Your DNA might be the missing piece that helps solve the identity of an unknown person.
Then Mind Over Murder will highlight cases Othram is working on to seek your crowdfunding support for DNA testing to help solve these cold cases.
Upload your DNA profile to DNAsolves.com. It's easy, free, and confidential.
Then join Mind Over Murder as we help families find answers with Othram and DNAsolves.com.
Welcome back to Mind Over Murder.
How did you come to get involved in this, and what did you find as you started working?
I really don't know how I ended up involved in the case. I really don't know, because I wasn't originally slated for this case or for this show with Oxygen. I was kind of added at the last minute. Mm-hmm. At least that's how it felt. I came in while it was filming. Yeah. And normally that's not where I come in. And so they also wanted me to do reconstructions, which I have to have case files in order to reconstruct, because there's like 3 levels of what we do here of what people commonly refer to as reconstruction. We do reconstruction, reenactment, or recreation. Mm-hmm. So what they actually wanted was recreation. And so recreation can be partly scientific from the standpoint of you use a lot of the same pieces that you can find. So, I mean, that's really how I became involved is I got a call from the executive producer, Buddy Day, and he said, Oxygen told me to call you. I mean, like, it really was like that. It wasn't anything, significant, crazy or anything. It was just like, hey, here's who I am. Here's what we're doing. Oxygen said to call you. We need reconstructions. Oh, okay. So that's how I became involved.
So you had mentioned that you need access to case files. Let's go ahead and make things clear for our listeners. Did you have access to the case files, the crime scene photos in order to do this reconstruction?
No, I did not. I had some crime scene photos that were available, but I did not have a case file. So reconstruction was off the table. You cannot do reconstructions without case files. It's ethically and scientifically unsound. We don't do them. So we have to go to the next level down, which would be recreation. And then the bottom level is reenactment. So they basically wanted recreations, which, for television are very vastly different than in the real world, what we do at LPA. So yeah, it was, I just had to jump right in. I was honored to be part of the cast. I was very grateful for the opportunity to try to help Bill and his family and the other 7 families involved. I didn't know much about it except from what I had learned from Bill so far. And so I just really tried to pull it together pretty quickly and just, do the best that I could with what we had, which was extremely limited. Yeah, very limited.
We had limited resources. Kristin and I have received literally hundreds of questions. The response to the show has been incredibly positive. If there's a criticism, a through line to the questions or any criticism that viewers might have, it's that they wanted more. I think it's really important to note for everybody listening, the FBI handled 2 of the Colonial Parkway murders and the Virginia State Police handled the other 2 murders without getting too far into the details. And the FBI and the Virginia State Police did not cooperate in the making of the show. I'm not making a criticism, but that does present a significant challenge, particularly for the 4 principals, yourself included, who appeared on camera, and you're all bringing some pretty serious resumes to the table. But you only can work with the information that you're provided. So we had the mostly publicly available information, and that presents a challenge, I think, for the on-camera investigators to present a story and offer perspective on something where they only have limited amount of information.
My opinions are based on things that I could observe, and my opinions in relation to all of it are very, very limited in scope because, what I do is really specific based on a lot of metrics and matrices that LPA uses that are part of the murder room. And we're not able to do those. We didn't have full victimology on every single victim, which is the foundation of the murder room. So that just being a limitation alone right there, I was definitely scaled back tremendously. And I too have gotten tremendous positive feedback about the show. I haven't had hundreds by any means, but I've had numerous comments and messages and questions from people as well. One of the questions people asked was why I was not part of the war room and why I wasn't in there bringing, and I haven't seen the show, but apparently the question related to they had set up a room where they were working and why I was not part of that. I don't have any idea why I wasn't part of that or not, because quite frankly, I mean, my role in the show to me was very limited in scope where they just wanted me out there working on the actual scenes themselves, because that is a large part of what we do at LPA. We do reconstruct lots of crime scenes, shootings specifically, and bloodstain evidence specifically, neither of which we had in this case, as far as we didn't reconstruct actual bodies. And that was that, that's fine because I have to have all the autopsy reports to be able to do that and elements from the scene that we didn't have. We recreated, what we could to demonstrate, to be able to work in the scenes. And recreation is a great tool. I mean, as you can see, lots of ideas come from that. When you're standing there looking at it, you can then reenact ideas that you have to see if, they might be plausible. And I know that, Lonnie and Maureen and Jim, I was there, on the side in the set, watching what they were doing. And they definitely came up with really good ideas.
They did.
Being able to stand there in a scene. Yeah. So it was totally a good idea to recreate the scenes to see what they could come up with. Because, my comment to everybody who has commented and said, we really liked Lover's Lane and we really came up with a lot of questions, or we have comments, or, wherever it was. My comment in response has been, thank you. Thank you for supporting the show, and thank you for supporting these 8 families, because they need answers and these victims need justice. So hopefully maybe someone that knows something or saw something, heard something, and it will jog someone's memory where they can then go to law enforcement and share what they think. They don't know if it is important or not.
Right.
Because nobody knows what are in these case files except the agencies.
One of the things that's very important to me is that, and this is very striking, and Kristin and I have both looked at each other numerous times in the last week since the show made its debut. We're not even a week out yet. People are coming out of the woodwork with new tips and new information. And this has happened every single time we've had a major media event surrounding the Colonial Parkway murders. This is over 34 years. People keep coming forward with new information. Now, ultimately, what we're going to look to do is turn that information over. I primarily do with the FBI. Turn that over to the FBI investigators. And as you said, Dr. Pettler, they're going to evaluate. I'm a civilian.
That's correct.
Kristin's a civilian.
Right. Yeah.
We don't claim to be qualified to decide this is a good tip or this is valuable information. We have no way of knowing, but we will pass them on. I've got a woman who came to me with what is new information to me as of this afternoon, and she's calling me tomorrow night, and we're going to go through this, and I'm going to turn this over to the FBI because they are the only ones that can truly evaluate whether something is valuable or new or different information than they had before. We are constantly surprised, Kristin and I, by how often this happens. Yeah. People keep coming to us with what often sounds like new information. There's one other funny pattern that's emerged. It's not funny, haha, it's funny, odd. For some reason, over the last, I would say 5 years or so, every time it's the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, always around those times, and it happened again this year at both Thanksgiving and Christmas, people come to me with tips. I'm guessing here, but I think they have a little extra time around the holidays, and it's a family time, and obviously the Colonial Parkway murders impacts 8 different families. It's funny, I received tips at Thanksgiving and Christmas again this year. This, by the way, it proves incredibly annoying to Pamela, my long-suffering girlfriend. I say girlfriend, she says partner. We're literally on Thanksgiving, she said, are you coming to Thanksgiving dinner or not? Because I'm furiously texting with somebody with what was new information to me, which I will be turning over to the FBI. But it is very interesting that the show now has brought about all sorts of new tips and new information, at least new to us as the civilian family members of the murder victims.
I can tell you that as the former director of Prosecutorial District 20A of North Carolina's Cold Case Task Force, what the public thinks and what the public knows about the cases is much different than what's in the case files. So no matter what anybody says or thinks that's a civilian, and in this case, all of us that are involved in this case are, the three of us especially. And then, of course, Maureen being retired, she's considered, of course, still law enforcement, but nobody knows. And a lot of times in my career, people have said to me when they have a tip, I just never thought it was important. I didn't realize it was important until they're sitting in front of us. We've shown up in their living room and said, hey, you know what? We're looking into the death of so-and-so. And, oh yeah, I remember, blah, blah, blah. And they start talking. And then I'm like, well, have you ever come to any agency with that information before? No, I just didn't think it was important. And so a lot of times what people think and know, they don't come forward to all of us that, when I was in the DA's office, they would say, no, I haven't come to tell you guys anything, because I just didn't think it was important. So they're making judgments. They're passing judgments on the information that they have. And I can say that in my experience, that's been a challenge because there are people out there that know things, but they're rank ordering their information instead of allowing us to do it. LPA works very closely with law enforcement on multiple cases.
One of the things that's come up with the FBI and Virginia State Police investigators over and over again is there might be something that an individual might tell them that lines up with other information that they have. It might confirm something or break down support for an idea, but even something as simple as, well, I saw so-and-so at such and such a place, which might confirm for the investigators, oh, we need to be taking a look at that. Or, oh, that puts him or her at this particular place. And it's really only the investigators who are leading the investigation that can tell whether or not something has value. A woman contacted me in the last few days, and she said, she attended a book reading a few years ago when Blaine Pardoe and Victoria Hester's book, A Special Kind of Evil, came out, which is all about the Colonial Parkway Murders. And we appreciate all the work they put in. Blaine and Victoria did a bunch of readings at bookstores and libraries and all that kind of stuff like you do. This woman had attended a book reading, really enjoyed it, stood in line to speak with them afterwards, and then she said, I lost my nerve. Well, this was 4 years ago or something. So she never talked to anyone about the information that she had. And she speaks to me the other day, and I said, I need a little bit more information here, but I think I want to put you in touch with the FBI. Here's this woman offering us information from 34 years ago that she thought about talking about with Blaine and Victoria, and I think Kristin may have been there, and Joyce Call Canada may have also been there. She was going to speak to the group about it. She lost her nerve. I think she's a little bit shy. She stepped away, and here it is. It's like 4 years later, and she's bringing it up. And now I'm thinking, you might want to talk to our FBI agent about this. But it's amazing how people will, and these are well-intentioned, but they'll sit on stuff because they don't think it's important.
They don't know. And I mean, I can tell you just from working homicide for 20 years, what we're doing in a case and what the media reports is many times just not even close, and I'll read about a case that I'm working and I'm like, this doesn't even sound like the same case. And it's just because it's normal for law enforcement to keep things close to the vest, especially here in North Carolina, because of our laws and the way that things are not allowed to be discussed in the public by agencies or DA's offices. It's very different in other states. A lot of states, you'll see people on TV talking about the evidence, like, a victim had 6 gunshot wounds, 3 were to the torso, 3 were to the arm. We're not doing that in North Carolina. That is not something you're going to hear people doing here. Law enforcement, it is their responsibility ethically and from the investigatory process perspective to follow up on every lead that they have ever been given. One of the things that I've seen in my career for many, many years in cold case, homicide case files that come to LPA to be solved in the murder room and hopefully then cleared is the fact that there's always notes, like case notes and a lead sheet in the case file. And then we ask, what were the outcomes of all of these leads that are in the case file? Many times investigators don't know because the case file has been handed down as people retire and people move out of CID and things like that. And so what we end up finding is that the leads in cold case files don't get followed up on. So somebody may get a tip and they call it in and it's documented in the file. So you have like a record that, somebody called in, somebody had something to say about this, but like you don't end up with the result of that lead, like what happened when you followed up on it, because nobody did. Obviously, one of the first things that we do in stage 1 is identify all those leads, any of those missing pieces. And, I deploy people to go follow up on that. That's what we have operatives for here. They're in the field, they're nationwide. It's an army of operatives that work for LPA on a per case basis to go follow up on leads and cold case investigation that have never been followed up on. Sometimes law enforcement, when they go to follow up on something, people may not be as willing to talk, but when it's not a law enforcement officer and instead it's a private investigator, sometimes there are people that are more comfortable speaking with a private investigator than they are with a detective. So, of course, the law enforcement agency sometimes tries and says, the person won't talk. An LPA will go in and deploy operatives to attempt to talk with people as well. Of course, sometimes people say, no, we're not going to talk at all. In my opinion, and the way it works here at LPA is that if a lead is brought to us and we, remember, we get like phone calls, we get letters from prisons, we get, from prisoners, we get emails, we get messages on Facebook and in other forms of social media of tips and all different types of cases. And so everything that's ever brought to LPA is followed up on. If it's a tip that needs to go to law enforcement in a case, it goes. And everybody here is either current, former, or retired law enforcement and or military. So, everybody kind of works together in that capacity. So every tip should always be followed up on. Every lead in a cold case file should always be followed up on, especially when you get information from victims' families. That is the number one type of information that should always be followed up on in any homicide case. So if it's a case that's being worked, like a hot case, not a cold case, and the family comes to the agency and provides information, it is the responsibility of that agency to follow up on that, no matter how mundane they think that piece of information is, how irrelevant, how completely out of left field, because the family of the decedent knows the decedent and the decedent's world much, much, much better than any of us will ever know. And so if they're bringing you information they think is important, yes, it's time consuming. Yes, sometimes it takes you away from other things that you need to be doing that are also critical. But LPA's policy is anything that comes in from the family, we follow up. It's just our policy. And it should be the policy, in my opinion, for all homicide investigations everywhere, in every country, from every standpoint. I will never achieve that goal, of course, of getting everyone to do that, but that is the way we operate here.
Let's talk about the Lover's Lane Murders television series for a second. At the end of the 4th episode, Maureen O'Connell, the retired FBI agent, comes to a conclusion that she believes that the 4 double homicides in the Colonial Parkway murders are related. And then her investigative partner, Lonnie Coombs, who's a former prosecutor, and they each come to the case with their own backgrounds and specialties. Lonnie concludes that she believes that the 4 double homicides in the Colonial Parkway murders are not related. If we put the question to you, do you believe that, based on what you know, which we know is limited, do you believe the 4 double homicides in the Colonial Parkway murders are related or not related?
It's very common for serial killers to change their MO. It's very common for them to change location. It's common for them to change weapons. It's a myth that people think that a serial killer, while they do demonstrate signature behavior or trophy collecting type behavior in many, many cases, it is also true that they don't always follow the same exact methodology every time for killing. They can kill with a gun one time and kill with a knife another time. They can kill with strangulation another time. There's different ways of killing people. So it's not a fair assumption to make based on methodology alone. Like, as far as it's in my opinion, it's a rookie mistake for any of us, meaning me and here people at LPA and our young ones. A lot of times people want to default to that. They want to default to case linkage analysis based on MO, where the MO is the same, they're linked. Or if the MO is not the same, they're not linked. For me, what is more powerful than MO is actually the victimology and the routine activities, and something that we call here, which is a word that I created because I got tired of saying all of the words. One of my many things that I do that people just laugh, but is called the geno-enviro-socioculturalism of a person, because I got tired of talking about the genetics and the culture and the environment and society. So I just put it all together and
into one gigantic word.
Yes, one super long word.
What does it mean?
And so the geno-enviro-socioculturalism is the aggregate or the total influence of how genetics, how the environment, how society and culture influence both the offender and the victim in relation to the vivid interaction that takes place between them during a paradoxical duel.
Which is what a murder is, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, it's a paradoxical duel. It's paradoxical dualism. And the reason it is because the killer wants to kill and the victim wants to live. Mm-hmm. So they are fighting from opposite positions. There's an offense and a defense, and I am not a sports person. Mm-hmm. Know nothing about sports or cars. However, I know enough to know that football players face each other, and one is the defense and one is the offense. One is trying to take the ball and go to the end, and the other one is trying to keep them from taking the ball to the end. Very simple. Very simple.
Yeah. That's right? It. That's actually true of a lot of sport. That's true of a lot of sports, actually.
Okay. Well, if it doesn't have to do with a horse or a dog, I don't know anything about sports. Those are the only sports I know anything about. So when you're thinking about a murder and the fact that it's a paradoxical duel, you have the killer with the weapon going towards the victim and attacking the victim. Then you have the victim, either, some personalities will run toward the offender. Some people are going to flee. Some people are going to fight. Some people are going to flee. That's where your personality comes in. Where environment comes in is, we work staged homicides here. So, you cannot stage somebody falling off the cliff of a mountain in Miami, Florida. That's not going to work for you there. So the environment has a lot to do with the sociology of murder, where you can't do certain things in certain places because you don't have the literal demographic, geographical elements that you would need to kill in that capacity. The societal aspects are, what are the social norms and what are the institutions in society that influence how people behave? And then how does that influence both the offender and the society the offender comes from, and then the society where the victim comes from? Different societies, New York City is not LA. And so, they're all micro societies within the American society. And those micro societies play a role. And then when you get to culture, I think, for me, culture is probably the most important because murder is so very cultural. Some people hold firearms certain ways in certain cultures. Other people use knives. Here in North Carolina, we have a large Indian population. And when I was working with the DA's office, one of the things I noticed were a lot of knife-related assaults and homicides from that part of the state versus other parts of the state that were higher for firearms. And it's cultural. There's different ways of culture is going to play a huge role. So you have to take that aggregate of how all those pieces interact and apply it to the case that you're working in. And in this case, the victimology in the Colonial Parkway's murders, there's 8 different victims. You have 8 different victimologies.
Right.
You also
right.
have micro environments for each one of them. You have micro societies. You have micro cultures. Once you get past the geno piece, the genetics piece, that first there's a trigger, then there's a thought, then there's an action, then there's a consequence, kind of an idea. The psychology of it is kind of the easier part. The sociology of it is actually more of the challenging part, because like in Robin, was it Robin, the 2 by the water that were walked out to the water?
Robin and David. Mm-hmm.
Robin and David. That looks completely a 180 from Kathy and Becky. It's a 180. So for me, do I have enough information to render an opinion on whether or not I think this is the work of a serial killer or the work of individual people? At this point, from the limited information that I know, which is much less than what Lonnie and Maureen know, I was not in the war room. I didn't have access to all those things. Kathy and Becky's have earmarks of someone they know. It looks like, almost like really kind of straight up conflict murder.
Join us again next time here on Mind Over Murder as we are joined by criminologist and crime scene reconstruction expert Laura Pettler. You saw Laura on the Lover's Lane Murders television series. Now learn more about her work as a crime scene reconstruction expert and advocate for families across the country. Next time on Mind Over Murder.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.